Welcome to Gratefully Gifted, a podcast for gifted kids made by gifted kids, because we do think it's great to be gifted. So let's get started.
Welcome to today's episode. Today, we are going to learn all about the Titanic. You will even hear an interview with Mr. James Meyer, the Titanic Museum historian and education executive.
But first, some fun.
I renamed my iPod the Titanic, so whenever I plug it in, it says the Titanic is sinking.
What kind of lettuce did they serve on the Titanic? Iceberg lettuce. And here's a little trivia for you. Which company owned the Titanic before it sank? Cunard, MSC, White Star Line, or Standard Oil? Pause this podcast to give yourself a little time to think about it. Okay, the answer was White Star Line. Did you get it correct? And now it's time for Talking Time! Thank you for talking with us today, Mr. Myers. Your job as the Titanic Museum historian seems so interesting. We thought other gifted kids might like to hear about this kind of job, as we also learned some facts about the Titanic along the way. So what do you do at the museum as a Titanic historian?
Actually, I have a double title. My title is Education Executive and Historian for the Titanic. And what I primarily do is what we're doing right here. I speak to people all over the world about the Titanic who want to know the facts, the real story of the Titanic, or they want to know about certain people, or they want to know about the ship itself. And so what I did I have a marvelous job. I get to talk to people that either call in or I do Zoom chats with. And I primarily just talk to students or even adult individuals all over the world and tell them things about the Titanic.
Okay, that was really interesting. So when did your love for the Titanic start?
Actually, my love for the Titanic started a very, very long time ago. I was in the 7th grade, and I was in the library of our school. And our teacher had told us that day that we could pick any book that we wanted to on that, not on a particular subject. We could just pick whatever we wanted to. And I happened to come across the marvelous book called A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. It was written in 1955. And even today, it is still the benchmark for tremendous books about the Titanic. And I was just fascinated with the photographs that were in it. The people in the lifeboats as they were coming up to the Carpathia, and the passengers that survived on the deck of the Carpathia. And then, of course, photographs of people that were on the Titanic that didn't survive and things like that. And of course, the story is just marvelous. And so from then on, anytime an article would come out about the Titanic or a book about the Titanic, I would pick it up and make sure that I read it. And then when I moved to Branson 8 years ago, I am a retired Missouri teacher. And when we moved to Branson, I told my wife, I said, you know what? I love the Titanic. I think I would like to work for them in some capacity. And the owner of the Titanic hired me to come aboard and develop an education department. And of course, I write curriculum for the Titanic and also come up with ideas for teachers in their classrooms about Titanic. So that's where it got started. And trust me, I'm still a fanatic today as I was back then. As a matter of fact, we call ourselves at the museum Titaniacs.
So what made you choose the job as a Titanic historian?
Oh, the job itself? It fit right into what I'd been doing for most of my life, being an educator. When I moved here, like I said, I knew I wasn't finished teaching. And, I had already retired from the public school. And so this gave me an opportunity to continue doing what I love to do, which is teach. And now I'm just basically on one subject, though, and that's Titanic.
Okay, so what is the most interesting fact to you about the Titanic?
Oh, most interesting fact. Well, there's just so many to pick from, but I'll pick a couple, actually. I'll pick one about the people. and then I'll pick one about the ship itself. The most interesting fact to me about the Titanic, as far as the people that go on it, was, a lot of people think the Titanic just had strictly very, very wealthy people on it because it was the most opulent and beautiful ship, at its time. But the thing is, there were so many third-class passengers on the Titanic. The Titanic primarily, was built to fit into the immigration that was going on at that time, coming to the United States. And there were over 800 people on the Titanic in third class, and many of those people were coming. Well, there were over 44 countries represented on the Titanic, and so to me, that's very important. That their story is just as important as anyone else's that was on the Titanic. An interesting fact about the ship itself: it had all of the modern technology that was created at that time on board. They made sure of it. They had the most powerful radio in the world at that time. It could reach 500 miles during the daytime and up to 1,000 miles at night. And it's because of that marvelous invention, the Marconi wireless radio, that the people that did survive, they were able to survive. Someone heard their distress signal. So those are a couple of interesting facts about the Titanic.
What is one common myth about the Titanic?
Oh my gosh, we get a lot of those at the museum. But the number one myth that's going on right now, of course, there's always been the myth that people that built the Titanic and were on the Titanic saying that she was unsinkable. Actually, no one associated with the ship said she was unsinkable. That was actually from an article that had been written about the Titanic in a marine or nautical book at that time, or magazine, that said, with all of its innovations, the Olympic and the Titanic are practically unsinkable. And when the media got a hold of that, they left out the word practically. And so, it's a myth that people were saying, like the builder, he never said that she was unsinkable. But the number one myth we get right now, a lot of people come to our museum and they say, is it true that that's not the Titanic down there? It's the Olympic, and that the owner switched them for an insurance scam? No, the Olympic and the Titanic were actually underinsured. When the Titanic went down, the owner of the Titanic lost $2.5 million in 1912. That would be 20 times that amount today. No, and if you look at the propellers, they are engraved and they have the proper number on the bottom of the ocean. 401 was the keel number of the Titanic, and the propellers have 401 on it. So a lot of people, and there's some people we can't convince. They say, "Oh no, I heard it on a podcast that that's the Olympic." Okay.
Well, our podcast has the true story.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So, how did the Titanic change water safety laws?
Oh, it was huge. As a matter of fact, most of the real safety laws that we have in place when we go on cruises today are because of the Titanic. When you go on a cruise today, you are guaranteed that there will be a lifeboat spot for each and every individual that's on the Titanic, that's on your cruise ship. You will also be guaranteed that any crew member, whether they work in the kitchen or whether they work up on the bridge, they know how to lower a lifeboat properly. You are guaranteed that there is communication on board the ship. Primarily today it's satellite telephones, but they also have radios on them that they are there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's guaranteed. You are guaranteed that any flare or rocket that is fired on the ocean today is a sign of distress, which, there was a ship nearby that saw rockets from the Titanic, and they didn't know what the meaning of them was. And so they didn't go to assist. And so those are all things that you're guaranteed of. You're also guaranteed that there are people on board the ship that are experts in communications so that they will be able to communicate a distress signal. And today you are guaranteed that there is an international ice patrol. The International Ice Patrol was started about 2 years after the Titanic. And back then, they would simply go out and patrol the area which is called Iceberg Alley, and they would communicate to ships, that there were icebergs in that area. And today, it's done by plane, and they will fly over that area constantly looking for icebergs, and then they mark them on GPS and send them to the ships. So the ships are very, very aware of where icebergs are at. Of course, modern ships have things that will detect them also.
So, if you could go down to explore the Titanic right now, where would you go first and why?
I would go to the bow of the ship and come in just like Dr. Robert Ballard did and see that amazing sight of the bow and the beginning of the bridge, which is the tremendous view of the Titanic. The owner of our museum, his name is John Joslin, and he is an amazing man. He and his wife Mary own the Titanic museums here in Branson, in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. John has been down to the Titanic. He went down in 1987. He was actually the second person in history to go down to the Titanic or lead an expedition down. And then he also was the first person to bring back artifacts from the Titanic. He brought back slightly more than 1,800 artifacts, and that's where the dream of building his own museum began. But that was the view he also saw. And he said it simply takes your breath away when you see it. This legendary ship coming up on it, just as if you had seen it coming across the ocean. And of course, the back of the ship is not in very good condition. You can't really tell what it is. So I would go to the bow.
Wow, this is also interesting for all of us gifted kids who love history and maybe want to be a historian one day. Now that we know we could work for places like the Titanic, what are some tips you have for us to move towards that as a career?
Like most things, never stop learning. When I first started at the Titanic, I always make myself goals about whatever it is I'm going to learn about. And one of my goals was to purchase every single book in the gift shop and read it cover to cover. Now, I stay away from the fiction books a little bit, but and they keep adding books on me, so I've never been able to accomplish that goal. But I constantly am purchasing a book from our gift shop, and I bring it home and I read it. And it gives me all kinds of little bitty information that most people don't ever get if they're not, looking at it that way. And so it gives me the opportunity to, speak to a lot of people about a lot of things they find interesting. But the other thing I would say is to surround yourself with people that also are passionate about what you're learning about.
Wow, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your job or the Titanic that we haven't talked about you would want others to know?
Well, one of the things that we are very, very proud of at the Titanic is that we honor the people who were on board the Titanic every day of the year. We love to talk about the ship. We love to talk about the story of the Titanic, but we love telling the stories of the people who were on the ship because that is our way of honoring them and keeping their memory alive. And we have had over 300 actual descendants go through our museum, and they always say the same thing when they're here. This is not what I expected, and thank you for telling their story. And we take that to heart. As a matter of fact, we have staff that have been with us for many, many years. We just don't lose people because they're either very passionate about telling the Titanic story, or they just don't come aboard normally.
We really appreciate you talking with us today. Thank you for sharing your passion for history and the Titanic. And some facts that I learned today were that the best book that you can read about the Titanic was written in 1955, and it's called A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. And if you want to be a teacher, maybe it can turn into an educational director or even a historian. That people from over 44 countries were on the Titanic. And the most up-to-date technology at the time was on the Titanic available. And
And the builders and owners never said the Titanic was unsinkable. Titanic changed his safety laws so we can all cruise so much more safely, and that John and Mary Jocelyn were the second in history to lead an expedition down to the Titanic. And if you get a chance to go to the museum, you'll see some of the things that they brought up from the expedition. And my favorite part that is at the Titanic Museum is where you get to stick your hand in the water to see how cold the water really was that night. It's so cold. And some important things for all of us to remember is to never stop learning and surround yourself with others who are really passionate about the same things as you. Don't forget to tell people stories. Like today, we told a little of Mr. Meyer's story, who daily tells stories of people from the Titanic.
Hello and welcome to Keep Calm and Carry On. Today we will discuss a sinking sad feeling, or the blue zone. As we know, sinking is okay, but it's not always good. We'll discuss some tips to get out of that blue zone. Number 1, get active. Exercising, like doing jumping jacks and push-ups, can quickly get your mind out of the blue zone and help you feeling happier again. Number 2, do something that requires mental concentration, like reading a book or building a puzzle. If you're thinking about this, you won't be thinking about how sad you are, and it will help you recover. Number 3, remember that just because that you are gifted doesn't mean you're perfect, and that you will have bad days, just like everyone.
Well, that is all for today. We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned some things you didn't already know. If you enjoyed it, please share it with others and like and subscribe where you listen to this podcast. We appreciate your support. We all feel grateful to be gifted, and we hope you do as well, because being gifted is great.